News just in, Bavarian Money Wasters join the big boys heavy towing club. Yes. Plus, some physics in the beer garden. Details next. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au, the place where new car buyers save thousands off their next new cars. Hit me up on the website for that. A little beer garden physics Q&A at the end of this video today, upliftingly enough, so stay tuned for that and get your pocket protector and your slide rule ready because I want to look this way through the glass teat and identify you. Plus, an uplifting message from the Australian Ming Mole Association because, I don't know, hotties. But first up, BMW's X5 and X7 were, happily enough, bitten by a radioactive spider this week. That happens a lot, and it always works out so well when you think about it. Predictably enough, an upgraded set of additional superpowers has been forthcoming. This should interest you for several reasons, I'd suggest, but mainly because if you're thinking about buying a premium large SUV, the X5 was, and is, in many ways, the best choice. I'll tell you why at the end of this report. But the big news with this update, okay? Maximum available tow capacity on most models has surged to 3.5 tonnes. Across the range, it's actually a binary proposition, right? 2.7 or 3.5 tonnes, with a tow ball download limit of 280 kilos across most models in the range. And by most models, right, I mean 270 kilos on the entry-level diesel and 180 kilos on the hybrid. And those are the two variants with that lower 2.7 tonne tow limit. Everything else, 3.5 tonnes. To get that big lift in tow capacity, though, you need to tick the box for the factory-fit tow package, which is recommended at a trivial $2,500. Like, why are we even discussing this? You are rich. Just hand over your friggin' black Amex card and don't worry about it. And then we'll take the high-class, let's call them personal assistants, out to lunch. I mean, come on, that's how we roll at this elite level. The biggest Bavarian money waster dude in Straya, Vikram Pawah, P-A-W-A-H anyway, he said, "Our sports activity vehicles were born for active lifestyles. From towing a caravan, a boat or a jet ski to a horse float or camper trailer, this towing solution allows owners to enjoy more of Australia." Born. They were born. I mean, it's such an interesting way to put it. Born. Like they're friggin' grown in a vat from, I don't know, gene-spliced porn star DNA or something. Hashtag CRISPR. These bigwigs, you know, they always go one step further than the credibility city limits, and I do not know why, because X5 and X7 are just shit-hot vehicles intrinsically. They don't demand lube and a wonder bra. It reduces them somehow, I'd suggest. Anyway, I'm tipping Big P was thinking about, I don't know, high-level stuff that day because jet ski? Really? A big fat off jet ski like a Kawasaki Ultra 310 LX is less than 500 kilos. I mean, you could tow two of them with a friggin' Corolla, or the previous X5, let's not forget. But if you've got the boxed set of 6 or 7 of those big fat Kwakas, then I guess now you're in luck. To be fair, I agree broadly with Big P in some respects. If you are that lottery-winning grey nomad, or more likely, the dude who sold his business and retired with a healthy nest egg, bought all the toys, you know, the Taj Mahal caravan, the QE2 trailer sailor, 7 or 8 jet skis, whatever, and you need a suitable implement to tow them, formerly the biggest bimmers were not that heavy tow solution of your desire. They just weren't. But now they are, happily enough. And it's factory fitted too, so there's absolutely no toss arguing if there's a reliability issue down the track, provided you don't overload the vehicle with, I don't know, 9 jet skis or something. The Bavarian MW tow pack comes with a multifunction controller and even a zoom on the surround view camera system. So that's kind of nice. I mean, that factory integration, there's lots they can do when you can plug into the CAN bus and play around. Just to be clear, okay, it's the X5 xDrive 25D, which would be the poverty diesel in the range, if there is such a thing, with 2.7 tonnes and a 270 kilo towball download limit, and you must select the M Sport package with that because, I don't know, rules. The X5 45E, which is the hybrid, also substantially upgraded on the battery front just lately, also tows 2.7 tonnes, but so that's maximum, of course, but with a 180 kilo download limit. And that's got to be an eco tyre thing or an axle load thing. I'm not entirely sure about that. The X5 xDrive 30D, the 40i, the M50D and the M50i flagship are all 3.5 tonnes and 280 kilos. In X7, it's 3.5 tonnes and 280 kilos for the 30D, the M50D and the M50i, and you can only get the tow pack on the 30D if you specify the M Sport package. So, if you do this, you just have to remember that the towball download imposed by your trailer is part of the vehicle's GVM, or the gross vehicle mass. That's whenever the trailer is connected. And that plays out like this, okay? In the case of the xDrive 30D, the X5 version of the xDrive 30D, the GVM is 2860 kilos. The curb weight, which is all the fluids are in, but the vehicle is otherwise empty, is 2,110 kilos, and that leaves you with 750 kilos of payload. About 100 kilos for every seat and 50 kilos for luggage or something. That's a healthy payload for a vehicle such as that. That is without a trailer, right? If you stick a 280 kilo towball download trailer on the back, which is the heaviest allowed in that vehicle, that payload will drop to 470 kilos, which would be 750 minus the towball download. I hope this is not making your ears bleed, but it's important to get this right. So, as long as you and your passengers and their stuff and any accessories you fit in total weighs less than 470 kilos, you'll be sweet with that maximum trailer on the back. But it really does pay to measure this stuff at a public weighbridge, just saying. One extra jet ski, that's generally all it takes to court friggin' disaster. Here's a fun factoid though. The X5 xDrive M50i is both a mouthful and a proper beast of a vehicle. It's awesome. It's how Tony Stark feels, basically, in that big unobtainium exoskeleton. And so it would frigging want to be, right? You're not going to get much change out of 200 grand if you buy one. A bi-turbo petrol V8 with 390 kilowatts and 750 newton meters, frankly, it's excessive. It's the friggin' Starship Enterprise in terms of its equipment and Iron Man in terms of its performance. So I want one, carnally. And you do too, and that's perfectly normal, and yet we have no rational need for a car like that. Absolutely none. However, most hilariously of all, and one would hope also somewhat irrelevantly, here's a comparison I can make for you now if you've never driven an awesome beast of an SUV like that X5 M50i. You could put as many as a dozen small to medium-sized jet skis weighing, 3.5 tonnes right on the limit, including the friggin' trailer behind an X5 M50i, and that combination will still manage to out-accelerate a completely unladen Toyota Prado VX to 100 k's an hour and beyond. And it's still not a fair fight, even loaded like that. The flagship X5 towing this, 3.5 tonne jet ski friggin' armada has 27% more power to weight than the unladen Prado VX. Incredibly enough. Yes, that's why I want one. And I know these vehicles are not direct competitors. This is just for perspective about how out of control awesome an M50i would be. I guess it's even worse if the Prado's DPF goes poopy in its trousers inconveniently, and they do that such a lot. Clean up in aisle 3. I'd like to see that drag race, I really would. The full 0 to 100 Outback Nomad jet ski armada, gravel in the guts humiliation. Call me shallow on this, but I guess as a professional I need to advise you that drag racing and towing more than 5 or 6 jet skis is generally an idea associated with a plethora of potentially bad outcomes. A metric plethora too, the big one. Of course, with no trailer, the M50i gets to 100 from stopped in just 4.3 seconds. Get the number of that bus, right? Which is practically before the friggin' lights have had a chance to go green. In perspective, okay? Previously, the X5 was a bit behind the 8-ball tow-wise, the Slovakian shitbox 4-ring-head monkey spankers Q7, which is essentially a Touareg built specifically for rich wankers. Offered 3.5 tonnes of tow capacity, so there's that. A 3-point swastika Hail Hydra Special Edition GLE 350D was 3.265 tonnes because, I don't know, obviously too friggin' hard to round up or down. Did we really need to specify this to the nearest 5 kilos just because Daimler? But the previous X5M, okay, a contextually anorexic 2.7 tonnes, which is still rather a lot of stuff hung out the back, but in context, the loser of the three. The big engine that couldn't, in so many ways. So, X5 was formally losing ignominiously the premium German battle for towing supremacy, but no longer. I also really don't think it's such a good idea to tow more than the vehicle itself weighs unladen, despite the specs, which are really nothing more than a manufacturer arms race, which is approaching the absurdity event horizon, I'd suggest. Call me conservative on this, but with any of these vehicles, the Utes, the Land Cruiser, the Patrol, these premium German SUVs, whatever, comfortably under the towing limit is where you want to position yourself for towing. Especially if you have long-distance towing in mind, the grey nomad thing, the round Australia trip, the big lap, whatever. Maybe it's different if you have a big fat 3.5-tonne boat and it's like 10 k's to the nearest boat ramp once a month or something. Okay, maybe. There's a case for that. A lot of load infrequently for a short distance. But if your baker's dozen of moderate-sized jet skis is whispering in your ear in the night and telling you that they've always wanted to see Uluru, you need stronger meds, not an X7 M50i. In any case, you are hardly friggin' getting away from it all if you're taking it all with you. However, the tow pack is a really good idea from a robustness point of view generally, even for moderate occasional towing. Beer garden physics just moments henceforth, but now, as promised, X5 versus the competition. And I would so like to say that the X5 coming out on top in this segment is a product of some glorious victory for the big bad Bimmer. But really it wasn't. The ugly truth is that the X5 is simply the last man standing after a series of enthusiastic own goals by the competition. Don't get me wrong here, okay? They all look the part, they've all got the cool features, they all drive really well, and they're all going to cost about the same heart-stopping amount, at least in the context of mere mortals like us, if you consider them apples for apples. And this is not what sets the X5 apart. 3-point swastika. Most aspirational, least reliable brand. Despite more resources than many governments, Daimler fumbled the safety on the bat pumpy and blew a massive 12-gauge size hole in its foot with its friggin' poor customer service, and then negligently discharged a second round into the egregious under-engineering of certain right-hand drive all-wheel drive models. Just Google Mercedes crabbing for details on that problem. Correction, operational characteristic. Hashtag arseholes. Volkswagen and Audi, tomato, tomato. The 4-ring-head monkey gases, notoriously unreliable vehicles, terrible service, the immoral criminal enterprise thing, well, that's also a real problem for me, I must confess. Touareg and that monkey spanking Q7, call me shallow, but I could not buy a car from a company that paid pseudoscience marketing arseholes to gas a few monkeys in lieu of the facts. And let's not forget Land Rover. I want to love Range Rovers, I really do, but if you're seriously thinking about buying a Rangie, I'd suggest you switch from crack to high-grade coke, because you can certainly afford it, okay? And the probability of ongoing psychosis is going to be so significantly reduced. Range Rovers exist to make Mercedes-Benz ownership look like a great idea to the spectacularly uninformed. In my experience, at least, BMW looks after its customers better. At least it does here in Straya. Certainly the ones I've referred to them have had their frowns go upside down when their complaint has been legitimate. And with these new upgrades, BMW X5 M50i and the X7 matching flagship, King of the Toad, and also, the lesser variants with that kit available as well. And now this from you. Over to you now, my favourite part of the show, and first up, volumetric efficiency in the beer garden. I wonder how variable valve timing and variable intake length improve volumetric efficiency as opposed to an engine without those things. Absolutely, both of these things help to improve volumetric efficiency across a wider range of operating revs, because without them, the engine is either optimised for low to moderate RPM or it's optimised for high RPM operation like a race car. And if you do one of those two things, there's a compromise when the engine is operating in the other state. If it's optimised for high RPM, it idles like a pig at low RPM and it's just not happy, okay? And this is one of the biggest operating challenges with car engine design. These engines are expected to perform well across a huge operating rev range from like 600 or 700 to 6,000 or 7,000. And when you drill down into what's required to make that happen, it's an insane expectation. And other engines, like on generators and aircraft and lawnmowers, locomotives, ships, whatever, most other engines, essentially they just sit there and they perform the same or similar at relatively constant revs, which are very easy to optimize for, and you can live with the compromise when they're operating outside those ranges. In your example of volumetric efficiency, would an idling blower supercharger have a greater input than 1 atmosphere? And would it be more efficient than a naturally aspirated engine, assuming fuel input is the same for both? Yes, they would, Edward, and very well spotted there. I'd have to say I'm not so sure about idling, but I suspect it makes a difference there because essentially the turbocharger is doing very little at low RPM, but the demand on the engine's very low as well, and it reverts, in a sense, to being a much smaller capacity engine at idle. At idle in a supercharged engine, you'd be getting a bit of boost, but generally I'd suggest that forced induction engines routinely have volumetric efficiencies greater than 1, like in excess of 100%. And remember, that's volumetric efficiency I'm talking about, not thermal efficiency. And, you really are battling to beat 30-something% with a gasoline engine, okay? When it comes to internal combustion, that's kind of where we are on thermal efficiency, about 30-something%. But volumetric efficiency can certainly be greater than 100. Volumetric efficiency is really just the ratio of the pressure in the cylinder on inlet to the pressure on the outside air, right? So if you've got 1 atmosphere outside and half an atmosphere in the cylinder, that's a volumetric efficiency of 50%. You can certainly pump that up, literally and metaphorically, with a turbocharger or a supercharger, and they do that all the time. That's why so many small engines these days are turbo and supercharged, because they're more thermally efficient and also more volumetrically efficient. You can also use so-called inertial supercharging on Atmo engines. That uses resonance in the tuned inlet manifold, okay, to create these precisely timed pressure waves inside that chamber, which do essentially the same thing, but it gets pretty noisy if you drive it right up. You can get to about 130% volumetric efficiency if you do that with an Atmo engine. At least that's what they've achieved experimentally with those inertial supercharging pressure resonance waves. You need to be a proper brainiac to do stuff like that, though. It's absolutely not the kind of thing one can do with a beer in one's hand in the shed at home. sadly. One addition green issue with hydrogen as a fuel is it produces huge amounts of water vapor, which is a worse greenhouse gas than CO2, so it's anything but green. Jesus effing Christ. Where do I start? Go back in time and pay more friggin' attention at school. That'd be ideally how I'd do it if I was you. If you burn hydrogen or oxidize it in a fuel cell, you get water. Absolutely. If you burn petrol or diesel, you get water and CO2. Once you factor in the combustion enthalpy of hydrogen versus gasoline and the efficiency of a fuel cell versus internal combustion, to produce 100 megajoules of energy for motive power out of the crankshaft using hydrogen, you're looking at producing about 10 kilos of water. That's broadly, okay? For the same energy output in gasoline, petrol, America, Australia, whatever, it's 12 kilos of water, okay? So that's a 20% greater water output, kilojoule per kilojoule. Also, importantly, when you make CO2, it stays in the air. Big problem. When you make water, it might be emitted by a tailpipe as vapor and go up in the air, but it is in equilibrium. Excess water in the air simply condenses out. You might have seen that. It's called friggin' clouds and rain. And finally, this uplifting motoring message from Valerie. Don't take this the wrong way because I think you're dead sexy, but in amongst all of the eye candy for the guys, how about some gratuitous eye candy for the females in your audience as well? Well, thank you very much, Valerie. I think you're dead sexy too, of course, unless you're a man, secretly. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I suppose. And irrespective of that, you have impeccable taste, just impeccable. But sadly, I am going to decline, respectfully, your interesting suggestion. We are emphatically not, that's not funny, we are emphatically not going 100% village people on this fine channel, not on my friggin' watch. And I am normally such a champion of inclusiveness too, I think you'd agree. This, however, is simply a bridge too far, and I will not cross it. A quick shout out, of course, to my very good friends at the Australian Ming Mole Association. Whenever I see that, it just makes me want to go out and buy a genuine tow bar and a dashboard hairdryer holder. Free bagging, obviously. But classy, okay? In a silk Dior bathrobe and matching flip-flops. Every time. You've got the money, you make the rules. It makes me want that, and I don't know why or how they achieve it, but I really do want to bottle it and sell it. mingmoleessence.com.au. Still available. This is all I have for you today, and I'm spent. Frankly, I've got the man flu, which, as you know, is subjectively worse than Ebola. And chicks don't get it. You get no friggin' sympathy whatsoever. I never get that. Ambassadorial duties, additionally, at the AWMA, well, they just suck the life out of you and leave you a withered husk, and I stand before you now, sitting on my ass, a shadow of my former self. So, like, hate, subscribe, enable notifications, hit the friggin' bell, and take away the number you first thought of. Remember when watching YouTube was a relatively passive undertaking? That was after the death of the dinosaurs, but before the advent of Twitter, somewhere in that broad range. Now it's a friggin' Cirque du Soleil cornucopia of creator demands right at the end of every video, you know? And call me daddy. Whatever. That's not funny. Kids these days, they'll say anything, but you know you want to. Especially you brain-dead haters. There is such a special place in my heart reserved for you. Always. And if you're normal, you know, articulate, a rational, critical thinker, you're allowed to watch too. I appreciate it, I suppose, but can you try and ramp up the hate, because I'm still struggling to break the 10% hate barrier. Thanks for watching.